Hi Geoff, can you introduce yourself for us?
Hi, Jess. I'm Geoff Pearson. I'm Senior Lecturer in Criminal Law at the University of Manchester in the UK.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about your research on football fans?
I've carried out ethnographic research of English football fans for 16 years, starting in 1995 with my PhD that I did at Lancaster University, and I carried out research with fans of Blackpool Football Club. I then carried out research with fans of the England national team abroad from 1998 to 2006, and then finally from 2006 to 2011, I did research with fans of Manchester United, and I was interested from a socio-legal perspective about the issue of football hooliganism, which had been a big problem in the 1970s and 1980s. 39 people have been killed in the 1985 Heysel Stadium disaster. English fans have been banned, and although domestically the problems of football crowd violence and disorder were reducing, abroad these problems were continuing. And what I wanted to see was whether the law and whether the policing responses were actually working. And I thought the best way to do this was to embed myself in with the fans.
Awesome. So, how did you go about embedding yourself with the fans? Like, how did you go about collecting your data for your research?
Originally my research was with fans of Blackpool Football Club, who were a small second division club at the time. And I chose covert participant observation as my methodology. That essentially meant that I went into the field. I went into the football stadium. I went into the pubs, to the trains and coaches taking the fans to the matches, and I did what the fans did. And I acted as the fans acted, and I didn't tell the fans that I was a researcher. So there was an element of deception, but I felt that was important to make sure I got valid data.
Cool. So, you're using ethnographic methods of participant observation or ethnography. So, what would be then your definition of ethnography?
I think ethnography is essentially writing about people or writing about culture. It is the outcome of a particular process of finding data. So the ethnography for me is actually the outcome, whether that's the article or whether that's the research monograph. A lot of people confuse ethnography with ethnographic methods. So they think that they are doing an ethnography just because they're using qualitative research methods, which mean they have to embed themselves in the field. And I think there is a difference between the ethnographic and ethnography. And ethnography, I think, is the outcome, whereas ethnographic methods are things like interviews, participant observation. But of course, you can use ethnographic methods for a whole range of reasons and a whole range of aims and objectives. You don't have to produce an ethnography just because you're using ethnographic methods. And likewise, technically, you could produce an ethnography through other methods. It's just very difficult to do so.
Awesome. So then with those insights, what are some of the benefits that you think researchers gain by using ethnography, say in comparison to other research approaches?
Well, it depends what you're researching. If you're researching complicated social environments, the relationship between individuals and groups, how individuals and groups understand the world around them and how they behave, and ethnography and ethnographic methods are really, really useful because they enable the researchers through long-term immersion in the field to actually understand what's going on, to actually learn from the participants themselves, and in some cases actually experience what is occurring in the field, both physically and mentally. So it can unpick and unpack all these really complicated social arrangements and environments. It's also particularly useful in areas where there is criminality or deviance, or where research participants are embarrassed about issues, or where they are afraid of authority and don't want to engage in a quantitative survey, for example, or a formal interview. And so my favourite example of the values of this comes from the work of Peter Marsh in the 1970s. And he was looking at how Oxford United fans were engaged in so-called hooliganism, and him and his colleagues sat down with a group of young Oxford United fans and asked them about the reality of their match day experience. And they produced on tape this very graphic account of how violent and bloody the football terraces in the 1970s were, about how fights would break out all the time, about how the police had no control over what was going on, about how you had to be, if you were going to matches, you had to be firmed up, you had to have a good group of you that could fight, otherwise you were going to be in trouble. And at the end of this account, Marsh played back the tape to them, and one of his participants said, well, sounds a bit bad, doesn't it? And another participant said, yeah, it's not always like that. And this same group then proceeded to give a completely different account of the same phenomenon. This time they said, well, actually, fighting doesn't take place all the time. It's very rare that fans would take each other's terraces. When fights do break out, they tend to be sporadic. There doesn't tend to be much violence. The police do tend to step in. And actually, the fans quite like the police being there to step in. They don't want it to get out of control. And it was as a result of this that he came up with his hypothesis, which was about the rules of disorder, and that actually this was not quite as wild and controlled as the media were making out. Now, he managed to do that through clever use of qualitative interviews, but I think that demonstrates the risk of just relying on survey or interview data, because using ethnographic methods means that you can identify on the one hand the reality of what is happening in the situation, and on the other the rhetoric. And of course, fans, if they are engaged in serious football violence, were they actually going to admit that? Other fans may exaggerate their involvement to try and impress you, and of course, fans are also likely to exaggerate the seriousness of the problems involving fans of their team because there is a certain reputation to protect.
Awesome. We'll be back with you in just a moment.